right, I think it's okay, cool. So hello everyone, welcome to today's APAC community call. So for today's agenda, so first we'll have Patrick here to share our recent OHDSI news, and then we'll do a quick preview of our kind of upcoming OHDSI APAC community calls and what are they about in the next quarter or quarter two of this year. And then of course the main agenda today we'll have Christian here to talk about the FHIR-OMOP collaboration. So with that, so I will give the floor to Patrick. So Patrick, would you like to share or?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jing. I appreciate you giving me a second to chat. So wanted to just quickly give a brief update on things that are going on in the OHDSI community. The main thing that I wanted to highlight is that we've now opened the registration for the OHDSI 2020 Symposium. And apparently my cat Chase is very excited to share this news with you. So the OHDSI 2022 Symposium will be held in Bethesda, Maryland in the US on October 14th, 15th, 16th. There has been some confusion across our community about the fact that there's an OHDSI Europe conference and that there's going to be an organized OHDSI Asia Pacific conference that hope tentatively it's going to be in, I guess, in Taiwan, and really excited about that. But one of the things I just want to make very, very clear is that in addition to the fact that there are regional conferences in Europe and in Asia and Asia Pacific region, and there could also be a regional conference in the US, we also really consider that there's an important and valuable purpose for us to have a global symposium where everybody has the opportunity to come together. I guess, unfortunately, for many of you on the calls, that meeting has typically been in the US, although we've actively talked about how that we think the global symposium should rove around the world to represent everybody's perspectives. But I just want to be very, very explicit in stating that we hope that all of you will consider joining the OHDSI 2022 Symposium, even though it's in the US. We're going to be back together in person. We're going to make this a highly interactive 3 days together. And we really would love to see the APAC region highly represented through poster presentations, software demonstrations, lightning talks, participating in our tutorials, and joining in the work group activities that will take place over the course of the 3 days. So if there's anybody who is interested in thinking about like, hey, is there something I could do that could help? We'd really, really want to encourage and welcome you to come join us. I know it's been 2 hard years of us all kind of being apart and virtual, but I'm personally really looking forward to the opportunity of seeing people in person and giving everybody a hug and spending time together in the same room. And I hope that we'll be able to use the global symposium as an opportunity to do that and really encourage everybody to come. And I know many of us in other regions of the world are looking forward to the OHDSI APAC meeting later in the year. And I, for one, am very keen to come visit you all in Taiwan. But for the OHDSI Global Symposium in the US, October 14th, 15th, 16th, just want to extend my own personal invitation and encouragement for you to consider to register, consider to join us, and hopefully consider to submit something to the Collaborator Showcase so that you can share the work that you're doing with a broader community.
So I just want to show everybody where you can go register. So if you go to the OHDSI homepage, the OHDSI Symposium 2022 is already out and available. And there's a registration link here for the conference or for the tutorial. So 2 different ones, right? And then what I'm on is the collaboration showcase, which I know, speaking for Asia Pacific, we're very interested in because we here are doing 4 studies right now throughout the year, and it's going to continue. And we would love to showcase our progress on those 4 studies at the OHDSI collaboration showcase in the US. So for sure, hopefully you'll get a minimum of 4 from us in the Asia Pacific, if not more. All right. So
And I'll call on Nicole because she's already said that she's going to be there. So Nicole, maybe you could share with the group why they should bother to take a very, very long trip to Bethesda. Why is it worth it?
Why is it worth it? Because you get to meet these awesome guys. It's, probably one of the best meetings that I go to every year, and I've really missed it the last 2 years. Everyone's, collaborative, they're friendly, you get to chat to people you normally wouldn't chat to, have ideas and talk over coffee and beer mostly. But yeah, it's think about going for the education as well as for the friendship. So register.
I agree. When I first joined OHDSI, I found the symposium to be the most unique thing. It's not like any of the other conferences. Also, I mean, we go to AMIA, we go to ISPOR, we go to ISB, we go to all those. HEMS, if you were there last week, right? They're different. This one is just very different. It's very friendly. It's very much of a learning experience and getting to know people. And everybody's so nice. You can just walk up to them and ask questions. Unlike at the other big ones, you're like, I don't even know where I am. I'm afraid to even ask anything because everybody's always in a rush to get somewhere in those big conferences. So I find the OHDSI symposiums to be extremely wonderful to go to.
And since Nicole put me on the spot, I will declare now, anybody who comes, I will buy you a drink at the OHDSI symposium if you come. And Nicole knows what drinking with me is like. It is a good time. So please come, if only for that.
A lot of beer.
Cool. So I do have a question, I think. So for folks, if they are, for whatever reasons, that cannot travel to the US, one of them, like, I don't know if like I'm in China, so I'm just gonna ask a question because I think a lot of folks on the phone call are the same. I don't even know if US is issuing visa for Chinese national like nowadays. So like even if we want to go, but I won't go there. But just a question is that for folks, if you cannot join in person, so while there still be like virtual events or things that people can join just virtually, such as what we did last year and the year before.
Yeah, so currently we have not figured out how to actually do anything that will be virtual in addition to the in-person. We're actually going to be trying to coordinate activities that are really focusing on making the in-person engagement as rich as possible. We will record all of the activities that take place at the symposium, and we'll post them as soon as the material's over. But what we're actually really particularly emphasizing is the opportunity for those who can travel and be in person, try to make an in-person activity as rich and engaging as possible.
That sounds good. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, Jing, the problem is not the visa. The problem is the quarantine after return that you have to go through in China.
I know, it's only like 14 days in a hotel room.
That's right.
That's like being tested every other day, which sounds not so pleasant, I guess.
Think about how much OHDSI work you could do if you were stuck in a hotel room for 14 days.
I should
get work done.
Christian and I were just Skyping about how amazing it would be if we were stuck in a room together for 14 days. So I feel like that could actually be an added incentive, is how much research you could do if you were quarantined for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I do want to bring up one minor change to the symposium that you may or may not notice. When you do go register, you will notice that there is a $500 registration fee. Okay. But I know for a lot of students that may not be something that your school will cover or you can't get grants for. So if you would like to waive this, there is a way for you guys to waive it, right? And the reasoning behind it, like any other conference, is the fact that it is an in-person conference and we are looking at ways to help support all the venue activities that goes on. And honestly, it's a lot easier this way for us to coordinate things because then we know how many people actually show up. When it's free all the time, it's hard because we get like 1,800, I think, last time, and maybe 400 showed up. So to plan an event like that for 1,800 people and then only get 400 people, it actually costs the Odyssey community quite a bit of money. So again, that's the reasoning behind it. But we understand that not everybody can pay for that fee. So if you do have some kind of hardship there, please contact the symposium to get it waived.
And to be very, very clear, all you have to do, if you want to come, but you don't want to pay the $500, all you have to do is send an email to symposium@odyssey.org, and you'll immediately get a free ticket. There's no questions asked. There's no issues about it. The distinction is if you happen to work with an organization who regularly expects to pay for conference fees, then there's an opportunity to just pay that. And if you are not in that situation, we will absolutely, no questions asked, give you a free ticket. All you just have to do is just send an email and you'll get a free ticket. So we do not want money in any way to be a barrier for anybody to come. Like part of the reason I stayed up late tonight to tell you all is I really, really want to see all of you there in person with me and Nicole at the microbrewery down the street in the evening after to enjoy actually spending some time in person together. And really looking forward to, after 2 years of doing it virtually, Craig Saxon and I kind of killed ourselves to try to make a virtual meeting as fun as possible. But we fully realized that no matter what we did, a virtual experience was like not even 10% of the experience of just like hanging out and giving each other hugs in a room together. So we're really looking forward to being in person and hope that you all can join the global meeting. And I look forward to also seeing you at the APAC meeting the next month.
As Patrick says, we are planning an APAC in person as well, symposium. We will provide more details once we get more concrete information in April. So look out for all that detail in April. And once we put out the registration and everything, we'll send everything out. But it is in the works for something, hopefully in person as well. And again, we will also look at whether or not we can do some of that virtually, but we'll have to see because it is a little difficult to do both at the same time. But it is, well, in Taiwan, crossing, fingers here. There's some paperwork we got to get through to make sure it's secured, but that is the current plan. Okay. All right, Jing, floor's back to you again. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Pat. All right, let me share the deck again. Okay. All right, so and then just wanted to give everyone a very quick preview, kind of what's coming up as for our biweekly community calls. So we're here on March 24th, where Christian is gonna give us a presentation and discussion about OMOP and FHIR collaboration. And then the next ones we will kind of try to mix things up. So we want to kind of keep every meeting a bit different, but we can still get kind of the working group update live from the OHDSI APAC collaborators, and then also while kind of hearing some of the recordings from the global calls on the working group update. The same thing, we're going to have the quarterly update for all of the 4 studies that we just mentioned, as we're kind of definitely aiming to get those studies ready, poster ready for both EU symposium or the global symposium coming up. And then during that, we'll also have kind of some working group update, as well as each chapter mid-year updates throughout kind of the upcoming few months of community calls. And all of the information will also be updated in OHDSI APAC website, ohdsi.org/APAC. So everyone can see kind of all of our upcoming topics for the community calls. So without further ado, we'll go to the next session, which we have invited Christian to talk about the OMOP FHIR collaboration. So as you might already know him, so Christian Reich is the VP of Real World Solutions in IQVIA and has been involved in OHDSI or OMOP from the beginning, and also principal investigator of OHDSI, and has been running so many different studies and more importantly, also the standardized vocabularies. So without further ado, so Christian, would you like to take the share?
Christian, before you start, you need to tell everybody, when was this photograph taken? And when was the last time you wore a tie?
God. Actually, I don't think I remember. It's not very recent, and I haven't worn a tie in 2 years at least. And most of the jackets that I have become fodder for the little moths in the
The
cupboard.
Korean symposium.
They
Korean
like.
symposium.
I'm pretty sure that picture predates our relationship, and we have been extremely close friends for 12 years now.
I think the
Well,
Korean symposium was the last time you wore a tie. Did you wear a tie at the Korean symposium?
No, the tie is a while ago. Well, you can see me what it really looks like in full reality, and it's actually, soon midnight, so it's dark, so it's not a lot of light that you that I'm lit with. But again, this is what the real Christian looks like on the, in the Teams
Little box, I guess.
So now I'm sharing. I have to share this thing. Oh, I have to just click on it. Okay. And now, okay. So here's what's going to happen. We had some of you have heard this. We've about a half a year ago or so. Actually, remind me, Jing, in which context we did talk about OHDSI and FHIR collaboration.
Yeah, it was
The
in
APAC symposium.
APAC symposium. That was 4 or 5 months ago.
Right. That's right. So some of you may have heard it, some of you may not. So I'm gonna go back to what we said then, because it actually still is all true. Swap presenter and slideshow. This should be now the right thing. Okay. And then I'm going to say what happened in the meantime and what's going on. It's actually interesting dynamics. I didn't expect it. And I'm going to explain why I'm saying this. Okay, so OHDSI and FHIR. I don't have to explain OHDSI. But let me explain how these two organizations and their corresponding standards fit together. Okay, so we are talking two standards with a lot of traction. HL7 is the organization. Can you see the mouse? Yeah, you can see the mouse, right? And
yeah, we can see
FHIR is the standard, which is for data exchange or interoperability of healthcare data. So this is HL7 has existed for a while, and they have issued a bunch of standards before. And FHIR is the latest one, and it's really taken off. Okay. In the last, I would say, less than 10 years. And OMOP is the standard that OHDSI uses, and it's also about 10 years old. Actually, it is 10 years old, and it also has taken off. So there are two standards, and apparently they, on the surface of things, they do the same thing, right? They contain observational data from some kind of healthcare setting about patients, longitudinal patient data. Both of them do that. Okay, they're both structured so that it's not just a text, not just a Word file. And they call them resources. We call them domains, logical structures, and they are. There is a mechanism to standardize them, and they are called profiles, and implementation guidelines, which are certain versions and applications of profiles. And we have the CDM and vocabularies. So similar thing. Here's why they're different and why there's a need to talk about this. FHIR represents one patient at a time for the purpose of representing one patient at a time. OMOP represents populations. Of course, you can say, a population contains patients. And here you can say, well, one patient at a time, many patients, that is a population. Yeah, you can say that, but it's the focus. The focus is to make a patient record interoperable within certain standard constraints. And here is to make a population analyzable, interoperable. Interoperable in the OMOP case means analyzable. So that's the focus. So it's designed for those purposes. It contains all sorts of things, but everything is a transaction. So whatever happens to a patient is represented here, including things like orders and schedules. Okay. So that somebody who looks at a patient knows, aha, he had a pre-op visit then, and then he had an op, and now he's scheduled for this. The patient didn't show up. The surgery is postponed till April. Okay, and OMOP contains medical facts. What actually happened? Not what was planned or what was intended. What happened? And then this is optimized for consumption by a provider, by a doctor, nurse, or something like this. The doctor or nurse should be able to look at a patient at a time and understand everything about the patient that's needed to understand. And OMOP is optimized for large-scale analytics. So you can ask questions, give me all patients who had a COVID vaccine and had a subsequent COVID-19 breakthrough infection. This is why these differences are important, because it's different use case. What FHIR is trying to achieve, what OMOP is trying to achieve. And now people, of course, would say, well, I have all these patients in FHIR. I want to do the large-scale analytics, right? Or people have data in OMOP, the common data model, and they say, well, there's all these apps that FHIR has, and all these applications and all these ways to interact with a FHIR record. Can I do this when I have OMOP data? So the question is, wouldn't it be useful for FHIR to be able to do OMOP type things, OMOP use cases? And would it be useful for OMOP to do FHIR use cases? Okay, and we're going to show you a few of those later on. So that's the idea. And so the idea came up is, why don't we merge the two or integrate the two? So the organization has level 7, HR7, and OHDSI came together and they made a contract and declared that we're going to integrate with the goal of having a single common data model for doing both, for sharing information for both purposes. That's the goal. So instead of having two, having one. That's the big goal, and it's not so easy because they are built for their respective purposes. But so the question is, why do that? Why not you develop one into the other, or why not keeping them separate? Why combining them? And
Christian, if I just add, because you made a really important point to me earlier this week that I hadn't fully appreciated. I really love your first slide that describes the similarities and differences. But one of the main differences is, some would argue FHIR is extremely flexible in that you can put anything in it.
Yes.
And some people would argue that the OMOP CDM is very constrained in that you are forced to put certain things in it. And both of those statements are true, but it creates an interesting incompatibility in that having the ability to have the flexibility to put anything in means that you have no bounded constraints. Whereas having bounded constraints means you can't put anything anywhere. And that's one of the things you had mentioned that was an eye-opener for me even just earlier this week, that FHIR provides tremendous flexibility that the OMOP CDM doesn't, but that is both a blessing and a curse, and one of the things that we still have to actually work through together.
That's exactly right. And that's what happened. That's what defined the last half year, the realization and the consequences of that. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Again, there's overlap. Similar logic. The populations are called cohorts, attributes are attributes, data model is data model, value set is a concept set, terminology is terminology. So there are a whole lot of things which look very similar. So what if we could have a mechanism before we join these two triangles to be able to make data flow back and forth seamlessly? That's the first step. So instead of merging and making changes to either one, what if we could go back and forth easily? Okay, so you have this magic machine, this appliance, and it could turn feeds from a FHIR client into an OMOP CDM instance, and the other way around. So you can go from here to there, from there to here, both directions. Okay, and again, there's a smart app store for all sorts of apps that you can do with the FHIR, and we have these large-scale methods and analytic applications and tools that we can apply to the OMOP world. That's the idea. That's the promise. And you would have to harmonize the semantic space for doing that. So, for example, in this case, it's cancer. Cancer is described in OMOP in one way, and it's described in FHIR in another way. And you would have to create a mechanism to combine one into the other. In OMOP world, this is called an ETL, containing a mapping of the structure and of the vocabularies. In FHIR, it's not that easy. FHIR doesn't work. It doesn't have the concept of a conversion of an ETL. You have to create a compatible data feed that adheres to a certain implementation guideline. Okay. You could do quality metrics. So it turns out that one of the very strong use cases is quality metrics. What's quality metrics? Quality metrics is a mechanism to measure how well a certain healthcare institution adheres to guidelines, and how well is the result of adherence to these guidelines in terms of outcomes. So, for example, a patient comes into a hospital with pneumonia, community-acquired pneumonia, wild-type pneumonia, not hospital-acquired. That's very different. Certain things have to happen. They have to get an X-ray, and they have to get an antibiotic prevention, and like 5 things or so have to happen according to the guideline. Okay, if you have a heart attack, certain things have to happen in order to have an immediate response that increases the likelihood of survival and long-term outcomes. And so what people do is they measure how many of the patients who came into a hospital for institution X actually got all the things that they should get, the percentage. Okay, and the reason it's important is because in the US healthcare system, the the insurance companies and the government, as one of the insurers, will pay more or less money depending on how well the quality metrics are adhered to. So how do you do this, right? Today, what happens is that the hospital have a person go through the EHRs of all the patients who came, let's say, in March, okay, and made a checklist, okay, how many of them got an X-ray, how many of them got this, how many are going to get the antibiotics, and so on and so on, and submit this to the payers, to the insurance companies. Okay, so this really smells like we need to be able to do this automatically. It's a huge amount of work. It's error prone. Everything is wrong about that. And of course, the insurance companies don't trust the reports. They can audit, they can come in and check themselves, but of course you can imagine this is not how it should be. So the question is, how could you do such a thing, right? So all the patients are in EHR systems these days, at least in the US, and I think most countries in Asia as well, in Pacific region. So couldn't you just take all these patients and apply a quality metric and create the result automatically? Well, it turns out in FHIR, it's not so easy for the reason that Patrick just mentioned. FHIR feeds are developed so that a provider can look at a patient at a time, one patient at a time. But the patients, the two different patients could be very different in the way that the content is represented. It's all according to the guideline. It's all correct. It's all syntactically correct. But for example, in one there is structured fields for the lab test. In the other one, it's stored in a PDF file. Okay, and both of them is okay if it adheres, if the implementation guideline in FHIR is adhered to. And for the doctor, it doesn't really matter. You can read it one way or the other. Obviously, we in OMOP knows this is impossible to do that, to do large scale then. If you do 2 patients, it already breaks. If you do 20,000 patients, it's impossible. So the idea is take the patient, get the FHIR feeds, turn that into OMOP, apply standard cohort definitions, because the quality metrics is nothing different than a standard cohort definition of a phenotype. It's exactly the same thing. Bring it back and create a report and fulfill the obligation. Okay. So it turns out this is a use case which is probably the strongest to move this whole thing forward, because it's a pain. There's money involved. It's always important, and there's no other way of doing it. Decision support system is similar. So in order to do decision support systems, you have to run a PLP or something like that, a patient level prediction, or some other machine learning. And again, in FHIR, it's very hard. Again, because between patients, the level of the standardization is low. It's enough to be able to create, again, applications that work for individual patients. Everything that concerns a population is hard to do in FHIR. So same thing, take it from FHIR, put it into OMOP, run the machine learning tool, put it back into the system, and run the model on an individual patient. Right? So I don't know, patient prediction for diabetes complications, right? Which patients is a high likelihood to get into complication. You build the model on the OMOP side, and then you apply it to individual patients. And if there's a high score, then doctor can do something. If it's a low score, can send home. That's the same thing. Clinical trial recruitment is another one, another use case that's very useful. Again, for the same exact reason. You have patients, you need to apply a standard phenotype, in this case, inclusion criteria for a study, and then apply it to patients. And you can do it in OMOP very easily, and you can do it in FHIR. Knowledge graphs, I'm going to go into this, all this. There is this, we are not the first one who did this. There is a project called Common Data Model Harmonization that the US government put together pre-pandemically. And it says, well, we have all these standards, PCORNet, OMOP, Sentinel, CDISC, Bridge, I2B2 ACT, and FHIR. And we hate it. We want to be able to harmonize them. And they decided that FHIR is the not surprisingly, the common denominator for them all, because it has the flexibility. Again, Patrick said it has the flexibility to represent all these individual patient representations and the richness of the syntax to be able to do that. Regulatory submission, you'd be able to submit data to the FDA. Right now, submitting data means you actually have to recreate them in clinical trials, more or less by hand, using electronic capture systems. And then, of course, we have disease surveillance systems, we just had a big pandemic. We still have it. Well, we hope we're getting out of it. But of course, in future, we should be prepared much better and be able to spot new pandemics and also manage them while they are going. Each time there is a flare, a wave. And at the moment, it's very hard to do this. All these surveillance activities that are currently happening are manual. Hospitals are sending in numbers of hospitalized COVID patients, and then they get collected at the CDC or some other government institution. Obviously, this can be and should be automated, so these things can be captured a lot quicker and with a lot less stress than they are doing now. And then we want to do this really well. We want to have a machine. So there are a bunch of individual projects that have been going on to do FHIR-OMOP conversions, but they're always one-off activities. What we need is something where people can go to and, they get taken care of, and there is a robust scaling mechanism to do this. So, people don't have to invent the wheel and figure all of this stuff out over and over and over again. Generally, so what happened is then the two organizations put together, and there is now a working group, but we can't call it working group anymore. It turns out that that word is reserved on the FHIR side, so we are going to have to rename it into initiative. The FHIR-OMOP initiative, and it has a conference page, and there's a Zulip chat mechanism. It's not that busy because few people are on Zulip, so it's a little bit. We have to figure out whether we improve this. But the conference page is certainly works. So there's a homepage where you can just Google it and you get it, which will tell you everything that's happening. And it's going to tell you. It tells you what activities are happening and the subgroups. And the subgroups are for the data model, for the terminologies, and then for the use cases that we mentioned: the digital quality measurement, oncology, registries and applications. The registries and applications they started, and then they said, well, we're going to just merge with the data model harmonization. So it's now down to four such groups. It's very easy to join. If you want to join, you just say who you are and what you want, and then you're in. This is the Zulip page. This is what it looks like. It's just like the usual chatting mechanisms with kind of like Teams. Okay, so you have different streams where things happen. So all of this, what I told you, is the status of last year, end of last year. Okay, so two organizations came together very enthusiastically, saying, "Yeah, let's do this. Let's build these mechanisms, and then to be interoperable, and then let's start filling the use cases." And so in good Odyssey nature and mood, I was under the impression, okay, that's good. We have these. These guys are going to get going, and they're going to get very quickly produce artifacts and results. And they didn't. They got bogged down. And it's interesting to understand why they got bogged down. And it has to do with what Patrick said. FHIR is quite complicated, and because it can do an awful lot of different incarnations, instances, for different purposes. So you can have country-specific, application-specific, domain-specific, for cancer, for example, FHIR instances, and they're called IGs, implementation guidelines. Okay, and they are hierarchical. So there is for example, there's a US core FHIR implementation guideline profile, and that is a child, a descendant of the general FHIR implementation. And the other countries have other ones. And the vocabularies, of course, are not like in OMOP, predefined centrally. They're registered, but that's pretty much it. They don't have the idea of a reference table where then FHIR essentially declares of how a COVID-19 condition is described in the data. So people say FHIR, and then, oh, this is this way where you can make data interoperable and exchange them. And if I have an application that can read FHIR, then that's it. Then I have the data in electronic form, and I can do all the wonderful things. And it turns out it's not the case. You can read them as a person, okay? And you can do certain. You can do and so everything else that you want to do that requires the data to be in a computer readable and understandable form requires its own implementation guideline. So very quickly it became clear there's no one FHIR, there are many FHIRs. Okay. So which FHIR are we then working on? That's one thing. That's our revelation to the Odyssey people, rubbing their eyes, saying, "Oh wow, we thought this is one-to-one, it's one to many." For the FHIR people, they also have the revelation, and the revelation is that in OMOP, a lot of the details are not explicit but implicit. Okay, we have conventions and we have definitions of our tables, and that defines certain things so that in the data it's no longer there. Okay, so for example, what constitutes a visit and what constitutes a care site and what constitutes a procedure and how does it differ from a drug, even though some drugs are administered as a procedure. Okay, we create these we organize, OMOP is organized that the things which are common to every record in the data are not part of the data. They're part of the model. So we have a very strong distinction between model and what is built into the model, and we are arguing all the time on the forum about those things, such that the data are clean, they don't have to worry about it. Okay, so you don't have to explain how you mean what you mean in the actual database. The model makes that all clear. I mean, it's not perfect, but we're pretty strong. And now I realize how much we did actually in defining OMOP. I mean, it took us, we're now in version 5.4 and going to for version 6. So there's a long history of doing this, and further and further and further defining how we want things to be described. And so for the FHIR people is saying, oh, you know, I have to know this. So how do I where do I know? And so in FHIR, you have to then declare these things. Okay. So for example, in condition, there are condition categories, and one of the condition categories is whether it is a diagnosis code, right? And for us, well, what else is a definition? You don't have to say that. That is part of the model. So for them, they're saying, oh, there are all these things which are in the model. They're implicit. Where the hell do I get them from? Because they in FHIR, you have to say these things. You have to declare them. They're part of the. So there's much less is part of the syntax and the structure. What we put into the model. It's because you have the flexibility. So both sides realize this may be a little tougher than we thought it is, you know, if we look at it, you know, superficially. And it requires people actually sit. So then what we did is we took a few examples. So we took something as simple as an ER visit, and how you declare an ER visit. And that took like several subgroup meetings to even interpret what we have in our model and in our vocabularies, pre-specified and modeled, and to declare this in full beauty in FHIR. So it was an OMOP to FHIR job. And in addition, then the question is, well, you know, there are all these source concepts and these source values. Maybe they contain more detail, and I want this detail in FHIR. Shouldn't I get that? Or should I just take what's in the standard? And then I, of course, would go automatically and say, no, just take the standard. The other stuff is just for convenience done. But then they're saying, wait a minute, but this is what FHIR does. And we may want to know that this came from an ICD-10 code. And I said, all right, you think you need this? So this is what happened. So there is the two groups came together and started figuring out that there is a whole lot more to be talked about, and this is harder than we thought. So what happened is that we now put together we want to now professionalize it and actually put a real group whose job it is to get us going on the back and forth. So there is a project that is administered by HL7 and funded by the Office of the National Coordinator in order to create like a full cycle, build one, you know, apply one quality metric defined in OMOP using CQL, which is this quality metric language. That's a whole other complication there, and apply it to FHIR data. In order to drive the necessary mechanisms that are needed in order to make this work. We missed. FHIR has these connectathons, which means it's kind of like a hackathon, and they provide FHIR. People provide FHIR data, very similar to our studyathons. Except there, the point is you have FHIR data and then you make it work for applications. Okay, so we wanted to have this ready for. There's one in May, and we missed the deadline because we couldn't. It was too much, too hard. Next one is now in September. Unfortunately, immediately, quite shortly before the OHDSI symposium, OHDSI symposium, I mean. But that's where we're now shooting at, that we have something that we can actually apply to the connectors, to the next connectathon. So having said all that, and I'll probably talk too long about it, the summary is there is an active, enthusiastic group that comes from both communities. They have some struggle to just become interoperable because everything is different. The way the artifacts are handled, the way groups work, the way things are called out, everything is different. So we have to learn each other's language a little bit. And it took a good amount of time to even get going in a conceptual way. So we know that we can make progress. There's still a lot of energy. There's still a lot of good.
Christian, sorry for interrupt, but just looking at the time, since we only have 7-8 minutes left, so maybe we can open up for a bit Q&A session, if that's fine. Can you hear me?
No.
If that's okay, like we can maybe open up for questions a bit. Yes, ask Christian questions. So do we have any questions?
I have a question. How can people get involved?
Well, there is a here you go. There's a subgroup sign up. Google it, and here's essentially the Confluence page where this is all in, and you type yourself in, and then you're in. It's very, very straightforward. Okay. Does it answer the question?
Oh, mine, yes. Anybody got any other question?
And then you have to come to the meetings that they have, and then you have to, and the rest is then history, right? You have to start talking to people and saying, this is what I want, and show me.
Well, here's a question, right? I don't know what time your meetings are, but you are in the APAC community right now. So is your meetings going to be APAC friendly if we have more folks from APAC wanting to join? Because, you know, with the time change now too, like I understand on the East Coast, it's 11 o'clock for you guys. So it's hard for you guys to stay up. But thank you both, Patrick and Christian, for staying up almost until midnight. But that takes a lot of dedication from someone who wants to join. If this meeting is at, like, I don't know, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's 1 a.m. China time, 2 a.m. Korea, Japan time.
Yeah,
and we talking like 3:30 Australian time here, right?
The FHIR people are used to that. And so what happens is that as soon as there is an APAC person, then it goes, what they do is they do one in the evening, alternatingly. One in the evening, one in the morning, one in the evening, one in the morning, one in the evening, one in the morning, to make it happen. So as late as possible in the evening from our side, which means for you, not too early in the morning, and the other way around. That's built in. They are very used to that. They are very global, just as we are. And there's a huge FHIR following in Australia. I don't know how much in the Asian countries that there's going on. And
there's quite a bit. I know morning, I think you're still here. There's a Singapore presence, and then there's also a Taiwan presence as well. Because I know last time when we had the Asia Pacific Symposium, we had the folks that you were talking to were from Singapore, Taiwan, and I think Jordan and Nicole, they're Australia too, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't too sure. But okay, so there is a path. Go ahead. Oh, we have a question from Anthony.
No, just a comment. So FHIR itself actually is by Graham Greave, which is from Australia, if I recall correctly, right?
That's correct.
Who started the movement, so I think it should be fine.
Yes, Graham is the one who gave birth to the whole idea and to the logic and the flexibility and the elegance of the. It's very elegant, but boy, is it complicated. Not conceptually, but then in the detail that actually happened. You know, we're gonna. I don't know. I actually don't know how this is going to be handled, because OMOP is going to say, well, you know, it's nice that you have all the ability to support these different versions and implementation guidelines and profiles. We ain't doing that. Okay, everything has to go into one OMOP CDM, and the mechanism for doing this and to present support for the, you know, for all these different variants, how that should work, and what's the mechanism, and how you keep that fresh, and what happens if that changes, because they all have their life cycles, and they also have dependencies from each other. That's so that you don't have to constantly redefine everything. You essentially make a child or descendant of an existing one. How all that is going to work in a generic conversion machinery is unclear to me right now. But it doesn't mean that that can't be solved, but it'd be interesting to see how we're going to solve it.
Christian, we only have a couple minutes left, but maybe at a super big picture, you have a really good vision about this that I think would be useful for people to hear. You know, you're talking to a bunch of people, some of which are interested in standards and some of which are, you know, researchers who just want to generate evidence. Like, why should everybody care about FHIR versus OMOP? What is the big picture of the importance of these standards and how they actually fit together towards OHDSI's mission of generating good evidence?
Well, the good question. I mean, the promise is this: FHIR is for interoperability of patient data between different instances of keeping patient data. Okay, different EHR systems or whatever system it is, right? And if that is true, and I can send all the detail of a patient from one institution to another, hey, why don't I just take them, make a big pool, put them in a database, and then I can do all the OMOP things, right? And I can create evidence based on understanding the populations. And the problem is, you can't do that by just pooling FHIR feeds together. It doesn't work. You know, if they're coming from, depending on the profiles that they adhere to, it could be okay. Certain things could work, but all the effort that goes, what we call the ETL, making the representation semantically interoperable between patients in the database, so you can do large scale, and the analytic doesn't have to do that. Okay, that's a huge advantage of the OMOP system, that you take out the interpretation of an individual patient and make them all look the same, such that you can do large scale analytics. And you can't do it in FHIR. And I say this, and people get angry because they don't believe it. They're saying, yes, you can, but you can't. You can only do very simple and primitive things. So the hope is, if we can bridge that gap and can take these, let's call it half standardized FHIR patients and turn them into OMOP, then a lot of today's electronic health records would be able to be used in large-scale OMOP experiments, and it would drive our mission internationally, you know, and from all sorts of you know, settings and constellations. Right now, you know, the bulk of what OHDSI does are these aggregated databases, where somebody has to do the work of aggregating and making them all look the same, right? That's hard, and there are all sorts of problems and patient protection and costs money and they're commercial and they're proprietary. If we could unleash the data that are in FHIR today, we would, boost the ability to make progress of the OHDSI mission by an order of magnitude. So the promise is gigantic, except we have to fix the problem. So please come and participate and help thinking this through. We absolutely need the international perspective. It shouldn't be a US perspective, because the problem with the US perspective is that the US is semi-standardized already because of the healthcare system. And as soon as you go into another country, all sorts of things are off. And the Americans, that doesn't even occur to them why that should be any different, but it is. So we do need the perspective of the international community here in order to make this work, and to balance a little bit the way that these people think about the problems. So I would greatly appreciate if you could follow the invitation.
We will for sure. I know last time when we talked about it, there was a lot of interest in FHIR. And I know some of the folks that has an interest weren't able to make it. So we will for sure make sure folks understand there's a working group and that they are looking for Asia Pacific's feedback. So
yeah.
Any other question before we wrap this up? I know we're 4 minutes over. Well, if we don't have any, thank you both, Patrick and Christian. I know it's past midnight for you guys, so thank you very much for joining us. And it has been a very educational session. And you're getting lots of love. Look at that.
Well, good night.
Thank you. Have a nice day for the Asia Pacific folks, and good evening, good night to the US folks. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.